Hey, good afternoon. My name is Eric Woodard. I am Director of Fellowships and Internships at the Smithsonian Institution. I want to thank everybody who's joined us this afternoon for this Here to Career webinar, which is featuring three of the Smithsonian's most distinguished conservators. And I'll let them introduce themselves in here just a moment. I'll make sure everybody is able to join us. While our panelists are introducing themselves, we mostly want to spend most of this time hearing from you and your questions, especially about how these Smithsonian rock stars succeeded in their careers, and questions you might have that they might be able to answer that might inform yours. So I'll start it off first, and we'll you should see a Q&A module. And so if and as you have questions, please put them there. And once we get started, I'll identify you and you should be able to ask your question live in the webinar. So without any other further ado, let me start it off with Emily Kaplan. Emily, if you could tell us who you are and where you work and what's your career story? How did you get to do this now that you've grown up and that this is what you do? Lay it on us if you would, please.
I'm grown up. Hi, everybody. I'm Emily Kaplan. I'm an objects conservator at the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian. And I started with the museum I started as a postgraduate fellow in 1994, came on staff in 1996. The museum moved to, collections moved to DC in later. So I've been in DC since 1999. And I got started in this profession in a checkered way, as many of us do. As an undergrad, I studied art and studio art and anthropology, stuff like that. I'd never heard of conservation. So it wasn't until I started grad school when I was 30, after I'd done a whole bunch of other things. And here I am.
And we're so glad you are. Thank you so much, Emily. Matthew, if you could tell us your story.
Sure. So I'm a little different than I'm a conservation scientist. I'm trained as a chemist. So my work is in understanding the kind of the physical and chemical nature of the objects that we have in the collection. I am at the Smithsonian's Freer and Sackler galleries, the National Museum of Asian Art. And I've been there since 2015. And before that, I was at the National Gallery of Art. And so I essentially apply the chemical training I have, and we do investigations to figure out how things changed, how they were made. And that can also inform how trade or art has developed.
That's awesome. That's all. I love that we have. Yeah, we can talk about this a little bit more. The whole within the sort of conservators, there's the whole sort of chemist side, and then the more the object side in terms of. But I love that we have that you're representing here, Matthew. Thank you for being here. And Sarah, if you could tell us your story.
Sure. So I am at the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum in New York City. I'm head of conservation and also the senior objects conservator. So yeah, I think we all have an interesting path to where we got to how we got to be where we are. And I studied archaeology as an undergraduate, was really interested in the hands-on component. Like when I went on excavations, I enjoyed working with the actual items that we were excavating from the ground. So I ended up looking into conservation graduate schools and going to NYU's Conservation Center for graduate school. And then something a little less usual that I did that most people don't do is I also went to Columbia Business School. So I have an MBA in addition to my advanced degrees in conservation. And then I, in addition to working in a couple different museums, worked privately for about 10 years. So I had my own studio in Brooklyn, in Greenpoint, where I worked for museums and other types of institutions who collect but didn't have conservators on staff. And I've been at the Cooper Hewitt now for about a little over 2 years, and it's been really wonderful and happy to be part of the Smithsonian, family.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So again, guys, if and when you have questions, please let us know and get them in soon, because I know we'll have a lot. But Chloe Phillips had actually reached out to me before this webinar even started. And Chloe, I see you're on. Chloe, if you can hear us, and if you've got a microphone, would you please go ahead and ask your question? And you may be muted, so unmute yourself. And Chloe may not
All
have a
right.
microphone. Oh, there she is. Go ahead, Chloe.
Hi. So I have a few questions. And my first one was, how do I get connections in this field? I'm about to start grad school, and I really like to reach out to people in the field. So I was wondering if you have any advice on that.
Yeah, so who's got a good answer for Chloe?
There
Emily,
you
what do you think?
Well, our professional organization is the American Institute for Conservation. So that's a good place to start. Are you aware of that?
I have heard of it a little bit briefly, yes.
Yeah. So there's a lot of information on the website there, including a lot of information for what we call emerging conservation professionals. So there's a Facebook group, the ECPN they're called, and there's actually a Facebook group. You could join that. And then we all kind of did the same thing, is that when we're getting into the profession or getting interested in it, it's going and talking to people. So you can make visits to labs in your area, make appointments, talk to people on the phone, talk to recent graduates of the conservation programs. That's kind of where I would start.
I just want to jump in a second when Emily said about ECPN. They're actually a very active network, and they have both conservation graduate students, recent graduates from conservation programs, and people who are interested in going to school for conservation. So they really span the whole network from pre, during, and just like recent graduate program participants. So they do all sorts of, connecting and activities. And so definitely check them out.
That's great. That's great. Thank you so much. So Bianca Poma, I hope I'm not mispronouncing your name, but you had a question. If you can hear us, you've got a microphone, lay it on us, please.
Hi, are you guys able to hear me pretty well?
We are. Go for it.
Yay. Okay, awesome. So hi, everyone. My name is Bianca Poma, and I'm also a current senior at the University of Florida pursuing my Bachelor's of Science in Anthropology. I'm also a recent archaeological research fellow for the Library of Congress, where I had an amazing privilege to work with John Hessler. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with him, but he's a curator of the Kislak collection. And so my question was, as interested candidates, what are some skills, whether they're soft or hard skills, that we should be bringing in to support the mission of the Smithsonian Institute across the museums and the research complexes as curators or researchers as well?
So that's one of my favorite subjects, soft skills. Who wants to take that one on? Soft and hard skills. Matthew, what do you think, man?
Well, I mean, I would think for me, I came into the museum community from totally different realms. So right before there, I was doing postdoctoral work at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, where it's mostly scientists talking to scientists. And so one of the things that I think is one really important skills is being able to talk across disciplines. So, and that's something that's great in the museum community, where I'm talking to historians, I'm talking to conservators, as well as other scientists, as well as in some cases artists, and being able to do that, and as a scientist to be able to do things in a focused way is a really important skill. It is also very helpful to have collaborators that understand a little bit of the sciences, so we can start the discussion, as well as I need to work on my art history. So that's kind of where I come from.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That one of the great things about the profession as a whole, including conservators, conservation scientists, and collections folks as well, collections managers, is that it's super collaborative and it's really interdisciplinary. So we pull a lot of stuff, a lot of different fields together, and so it's really a breadth of knowledge.
Absolutely, absolutely. Cool. Hey, Bianca, thank you so much for that question. I saw that Redeem Petaway had a question. Redeem, if you can hear us and we can hear you, go for it.
Yeah, hi. Thank you guys so much for offering your time. So basically, I have a kind of unique background. I graduated with a bachelor's in fine arts, and I'm also a licensed educator as well. But I did recently get a fellowship at a museum, which is more like curatorial. And I wondered, I guess, what advice you have for someone who has that fine arts background and education background, who's wanting to get more into like curation, collections, archiving, and things like that.
Anybody want to take that one?
Sarah, you want to?
Sure. So I guess being a conservator is a little different from being a curator. We work collaboratively and we work on projects together all the time, but they are two distinct professional pathways. So if you're interested in more hands-on conservation type care for a collection, we also have to have a strong background in the sciences. So the graduate schools require, for instance, NYU requires through organic chemistry. So just sort of making sure you enjoy science and are interested in studying science as well as part of the suite of skills that are required for that career. Is I always tell people to look at that. But if you are interested in collections care, for instance, and to be a collections care professional, but not a conservator per se. So somebody who has a collections care preservation background might be a collections manager who works collaboratively across those collections facing departments, such as conservators and curators, by helping to make sure the collections are tracked, like, which is a bit of registrarial work, or are cared for, working collaboratively with conservators, are like the needs of the collections are met. We have a fantastic collections manager at the Cooper Hewitt where I am that I work with very, very closely. And so she has a museum studies background, a graduate degree in museum studies, where those aspects of collections care and collections management are addressed. A lot of database work, for instance, a very common one is the museum system, TMS. So she does a lot of work in that to track the collections and to make sure that the provenance information is associated, like the proper records are associated with the collections. I feel like I'm rambling here, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that there's multiple pathways to work in an institution that has a collection, and there's multiple ways to be involved directly with that collection, and understanding what your interests are in conjunction with your skills is a really good way to get started. Like, what do I like to do? What am I good at? Don't like science, like working with a lot of, information, database entry, but also active, like working with collection would be a collections manager. Like to do a lot of research and interpretation, that's curatorial. Does that help at all?
Yeah, no, any more to add to that, guys? The only other thing I'd offer, and Emily or Sarah, I think your answer is really good, is the other, it's sort of a combination of what you're interested in plus what you're good at. And that sort of dovetails too with what the universe needs, in the sense of, you want to make sure that you lay both those things out with what's in demand, not just a little bit, but a lot. And it was interesting, Sarah, you saying what you're good at, because, what you're good at, people will tend to pay you a lot of money to do, as long as it's something that they need. If you're good at something the world doesn't need, not so great. Just something to think about with early career stuff. Yamile Gonzalez, she said that she's sorry she didn't have a microphone, but she asked, this is a good one, what does a normal workday look like for you? What does that look like for you, Emily?
I work in the conservation lab most of the time, but I also we have two museums, one in three facilities. So one is where our collections are and our lab is, and that's in Suitland, Maryland. And then we have a museum on the Mall in DC, and we have a museum in Lower Manhattan. So I might be working at any one of those facilities depending on what I'm doing. So if I'm working on an exhibit, then I'll be either in New York or DC. If I'm working out at our Cultural Resources Center, every day is different, to be honest with you. I do a lot of collaboration with, we have, at any given time, we have 4 postgraduate fellows who are funded by the Mellon Foundation, and we also have interns who are at various stages. So we have for example, a pre-program, what we call a pre-program 6-month internship. So I'll be working with all of those folks. They tend to do more of the hands-on treatment of the collections, preparing for exhibits and loans. So I would be mentoring them, supervising them, helping them to write their treatment proposals. And we also focus on a lot of background research, because our collections is a very important part of what we do. And then we also do a lot of collaborative work with Indigenous people from various different communities, whether they're artists or they're knowledge bearers. So we might be doing workshops with people like that. It really varies. And then I also do a lot of research as well. So I work with people like Matthew, although I know you, but I haven't worked with you, but I do a lot of scientific investigation into the materiality of collections, especially from Latin America, especially from the Andes. And so I don't have a typical day. I also do a lot of database work, because we're enhancing our database to make sure that it is as complete as it can be.
Matthew, Sarah, what's anything your day? What's the craziest thing on your days?
Should I jump in? I
Go
don't
for
know.
it.
Yeah. So, I'd say we also have 2 sites, so not as many sites as NMAI, but we have our museum, and I have a small conservation lab there, very, very small. Although my colleagues in paper and textiles have larger labs on site at the museum. Then we have a large offsite facility in New Jersey with my lovely, huge conservation lab, which I love so much. So I'm really wearing, I'm wearing like multiple hats. I'd say, if it's a treatment day, which are not, unfortunately, as often as I would like, then I'm out at Newark, and I'm really I try to make sure, like, if I'm doing conservation treatment meeting, I'm actually working directly on an object, or I'm preparing to work directly on an object to stabilize it, to do whatever I think it needs. Then I really try to have like a full day, so I'm not distracted and I'm not doing other things. Unfortunately, majority of my time is also like many people, just in meetings and filling out paperwork. So there's a lot of administration that I end up doing, which I think is just part of the job. And a lot of times, love to do research. Emily said we do a lot of research right now. We're initiating a technical study with the Metropolitan Museum scientists because they're right down the street. So we're doing a big porcelain technical study. We're getting a lot of background information on that. And then I'm also, so that day might be like a library / working on close looking at our collections kind of a day. And then other days are working with my conservation colleagues. If we're working on a particular educational outreach initiative, we might be taking meetings and working on that and then lecturing. So yeah, I'd say there is no one type of day, which also makes it fun and exciting, but there are days that are more fun than other days, like any job.
Absolutely. Hey, Matthew, Ali Larkin had a question for you. Ali, can you hear us? Can we hear you?
Yeah, can you hear me?
We sure can.
Yes.
Yeah. Hey, Matthew. I have a BS in chemistry, and I have been the past 3 years doing pre-programmed things for art conservation pathway, art history, studio art classes. But I kind of started thinking, I currently work in a clinical diagnostic laboratory, and I have like physical chemistry research, and I haven't really been able to figure out what the pathway for more of a museum scientist would be. I've thankfully done some art conservation work at the Biltmore and things of that nature. So I've kind of understand the path I would need to take if I pursue that, but I've been having trouble understanding if I decide to do more of a museum scientist approach, what it would be like.
Right. I mean, so one of the facts is there isn't a direct pathway, and there isn't let's say, a master's or a PhD program that's specifically in conservation science in the United States. So there's a lot of different ways that people find their way into the field. Certainly what you're doing, getting experience in the fact that you're working with the museums, if you continue on to that helps a lot. I can admit I did my undergraduate in chemistry, and I did a PhD in analytical chemistry that has nothing to do with cultural heritage museum sciences, but through a couple of different ways, I kind of stumbled into it. So there's a set of scientists that I know that's kind of how they came into it. There are others that come from more the archaeometry field, and there are some that have come and have done museum programs while getting a scientific degree. There's unfortunately not a simple piece of advice, but I think getting the experience and then kind of knowing the type of work that you'd like to do, I would say there are some technician positions that might only require a bachelor's of sciences, but there are fewer of those in the institutions that I know. More and more, either a master's or a PhD are required for many of the job positions that are posted. So that's something to be aware of. I definitely recommend looking at some of the conservation websites, and then starting now to kind of follow what's posted and what are they asking for. But continue, if you're interested in the museums overall, certainly take advantage of any opportunity you can to work with them and get some more experience and increase your network.
Awesome. Awesome.
And visiting some, visiting labs if you can, like where Matthew works, and just kind of, getting an idea of talking to people and getting an idea of what's going on.
That's great. That's great. So Rachel Bartkus had a question that's sort of along these same lines. If I can, there she is. Rachel, can you hear us? Can we hear you?
Yes, can you hear me?
You sure can.
Okay, yeah, so the question that I was asking is that as someone who is a career technician, what can I do to get out of this sort of the transition from being an early career professional to a mid-career professional?
Great. Sarah, what do you think about that?
It's a good question. So I always think of professional development as something that helps to encourage my career along. I mean, and depending on what that looks like is also dependent on one's interest and where you see they always say to do that exercise, like, where do you want to be in 5 years? Where do you want to be in 10 years and how to get there? But even just taking additional courses, for instance, might be helpful in helping to guide or steer you along to finding that next opportunity or getting that next skill set. And that doesn't have to necessarily come with the whole 5-year plan. I know exactly where I'm going, but more like and also I should say, it doesn't necessarily, I don't think, have to be, for instance, archiving, I don't know, how to properly rehouse archives or something like that. It could potentially even be something like negotiations and building other soft skills in the workplace. You know what I mean? Like honing your full career, your full discipline, I think could also include those other classes that are not career specific, but yet might help push you along to the next level, where you then might be open to an opportunity that'll get that more advanced title or more sort of holistic responsibilities that are more challenging in a good way. That would be my first response.
Project management skills are also super useful.
Yeah.
Good point. Good point.
Yeah. And Amanda Muir had sort of a similar question, asking about skills. Amanda, are you with us?
Hello?
Sure.
Hey there, Amanda, go ahead with your question.
Hi, so I'm a recent graduate. I graduated in 2018, and I'm just kind of wondering, along the same lines, what skills and opportunities I should either look for or work towards to know if conservation specifically would be the right field for me, or if I should look towards something else.
Thanks, Amanda.
So I would definitely check out all of the conservation graduate program websites to find out what the prereqs are, because they're really heavy duty. You have to have a lot of experience before you can even get an interview to one of the graduate programs. But if you start looking at what they're asking for, then you can get an idea of what you need to do. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that helps a lot.
If I could just jump in also to echo, Emily, what you said earlier about the conservation science pathways. Again, like reaching out to conservators who might be in your area would also be, just to do informational interviews. I do them all the time. I mean, I really, never say, no, I can't do it. It's about finding the time, like whether it's on the phone or whether it's coffee at the museum, talking to people and hearing about what they do and what projects they're working on, and whether or not, it's something that you would yourself feel like, indeed, it's the career you'd like to pursue.
Awesome. Thanks. So we've got a series of questions, and guys, this may be close to our last one, but a number of people asking, obviously, sort of the big thing going on right now with COVID-19, and it occurs to me that there's some fields where, you can do stuff virtually, but your stuff almost by definition, you tell me if I'm wrong, objects, you guys are taking care of the objects, which are physical and there. And Matthew, if you could start us out, but how is this going to affect your profession or opportunities to get professional development in this field? What do you think, man?
Right. Well, I mean, so as a scientist, we have our lab is inside the museum, and they are things that I can't bring home with me. And obviously I can't bring the art home with me either. At the moment, I have a lot of data that needs to be analyzed. So a lot of our work, there's times where I'm interacting with the objects, collecting information from them, and then it also takes a lot of time to write reports or just process that information and interpret it. So I have plenty of stuff to work on at present, but you're right, there's sort of limits, and we can start to do other different ways of looking at outreach and things that we can build, but it will change. It'll start to change of what we can do.
Emily, Sarah, anything to add to that?
Well, I always have I think a lot of us do, we have a huge backlog of projects. So maybe articles that we wanted to write that we never had time to do, a lot of processing of not the kind of data that Matthew has, but images and records and all kinds of stuff like that. I'm also working on a few writing projects. We're also working on, we just recently had about 20,000 35 millimeters color slides that were old documentation scanned. And so I'm working with other folks on getting those into our database, adding metadata and stuff like that. So that actually right now takes up a lot of my time.
Yeah, and I'll add also, in addition to like writing projects, absolutely. It's almost like exciting to have time, because it's so rare that you do have a period of time to sit and write. I'm editing like second revisions on an article right now, but we have some digital media that we collect as collections. So digital objects like Born Digital, and our contract digital conservator is able to work on them because those are files that just kind of get transferred, right? So they're actually able to proceed. So most collections, when you're doing conservation work, if you're not doing the research, but you're doing the actual work, obviously it's physical and you need the object, except in Born Digital, it's a little different. So as long as there's a workstation, he obviously is working at a workstation. So just wanted to make that point that, and that's an emerging area of our field, very cutting edge. It's super interesting to follow.
Awesome. Well, guys, I just want to thank you, and to the almost 100 participants that stayed on this for the duration. For what it's worth, as somebody sees a lot of early professionals trying to figure out their path, the fact that you guys have tuned into something like this and stuck with it and asked such great questions, you can take satisfaction in knowing that you're winning, at least ahead of your competitors. I would humbly suggest. But I want to thank our distinguished panelists. And again, we hope to do this again next Thursday. I'm not sure exactly what group of professionals we'll have then, but we'll try and mix it up. But to our very distinguished conservators, Emily Kaplan, Matthew Clarke, and Sarah Brock, thank you very much. And to everybody who's tuned in, thank you for joining us today, and hope you have a good day. Thanks again, everybody.
Everybody.
Thank you, everybody.